أجمعين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. أما بعد, there is something that the scholars of Islam refer to as al-daruriyat al-khamsa. This literally translates to the most basic and fundamental 5 things. What is that? Well, when we look at life, at every moment, at every junction, every minute in our lives, we are faced with choices to make. We have to make decisions. And what are decisions? Decisions are a trade-off. You are either choosing one thing over another, you are choosing to forfeit one thing on behalf of another. That represents all of life. All of life, all of our days and nights. Every time I choose to do something, every time I refrain from something, I am prioritizing. And so life and its choices are all based and founded on priorities. This goes back to a basic game plan that a person says to himself, what are my priorities? And any person who makes choices, you can watch the choices that they make, and from those choices, you can deduce what this person's priorities are. And that is what makes people of high value or low value, of high esteem or low esteem, of high stature or no stature at all. It is their priorities. That is what makes a person or breaks a person. That is what makes a person considered to be, or even a people, a group of people. Based on the priorities that they have, those priorities will dictate the choices that they make, which will dictate who those people really are at heart. You know, there is something that kind of floats around, and Muslims, sometimes we hear things and we accept them because at face value they sound good, but they're not. So for instance, one thing that is taken from Christianity, modern Christianity, is the idea of, they say, hate the sin, not the sinner. We've heard this before. And many Muslims think that this is part of Islam. It sounds good, it's very poetic, sounds really good, and it spreads this message of love to everybody, right? So we hate the action, we hate the sin, but not the sinner. We love everybody. You say, even the devil himself, do you love him? Right? Even Iblis, do you love Iblis? You hate his actions, but you love Iblis, right? The statement sounds very poetic and it's a one-liner, but it falls apart when it is rigored under such questioning. This idea of separating between the actions and the person who does the actions is not of the Quran and Sunnah. A person's actions are an extension of that person, correct? So for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, are they created? No. They are of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. His names and attributes, they are of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We do not distinguish between affirming the action and affirming Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We affirm all. And for this reason, when we look, for instance, in Surah Hud, listen to this verse. Nuh alayhi salam was in his boat, in his ark. The waves Allah described were like mountains, swelling, and he saw his son. And he said to him, my son, ride with us, get into the boat. اركب معنا ولا تكن مع الكافرين. Don't be with the disbelievers, come with us. And he said, no, I'm headed for high ground, I'll be okay. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَحَالَ بَيْنَهُمَا الْمَوْجُ فَكَانَ مِنَ الْمُغْرَقِينَ. And the waves came between them, and his son was swept away, and Nuh alayhi salam was spared. Now, Nuh alayhi salam asked a question. He said, my Lord, you promised me the safety of my family. My son is from my family. That's all he said. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responded, listen to this verse. He said, قال يا نوح إنه ليس من أهلك إنه عمل غير صالح. He said, oh Nuh, he is not of your family. He is, now what you're expecting to hear is he does bad deeds, right? Or he does bad actions. But it literally translates to إنه عمل غير صالح. He is bad deeds. That's the translation, the literal translation. But in another recitation of the same verse, a correct recitation that the Prophet recited and taught was إنه عمل غير صالح. He did bad deeds. Two recitations, same verse. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, he does bad deeds, he is bad deeds. Why? Because a person's actions are an extension of that person's self. Those actions represent the choices a person makes, and choices represent what? Priorities. That's what your aqidah is. That's what my aqidah is. And so, priorities, they are expressed in choices, and choices are expressed in actions. This is what makes people good people and bad people. They're not all the same. And we don't distinguish between the action and the one who does the action. We notice that Pharaoh's wife, when she made dua to Allah in Surah Al-Tahrim, she said, وَنَجِّنِي مِن فِرْعَوْنَ وَعَمَلِهِ. My Lord, spare me, save me from Pharaoh and his actions. She didn't say spare me from his actions. He's a good guy. I love Pharaoh, but his actions are bad. Hate the sin, but don't hate the sinner, right? That's not part of our aqidah. Actions are a reflection of choice. Choice is a reflection of priorities, right? These 5 things, back to what we started with, these are called the daruriyat al-khams. These are called the 5 fundamental priorities. When we say all of the prophets and messengers, all of the revelations of Allah, they all came generally to restore and preserve these 5 things for the human being. 5 things. Number 1, a person's deen, a person's beliefs and religion. Number 2, the preservation of a person's blood and body and physical existence. Number 3, the preservation of a person's honor, a person's reputation, a person's lineage. Number 4, a preservation of a person's wealth. The preservation of a person's wealth. And number 5, the preservation of a person's mind. And if we were to put them in order, it would be person's religion, person's deen, a person's mind, his intellect, his consciousness, his body, his lineage and his reputation and his honor, and his wealth. all of the rulings of Islam are for these 5 priorities. That is what the religion of Islam is for. Any ruling in Islam, it is geared towards the preservation of these 5 priorities. If you understand Islam through that lens, you now understand that anything that threatens a person's religion or deen or belief, what takes priority? A person's deen or a person's blood? A person's deen, that comes first. The whole point is to preserve a person's deen, or a person's intellect, or a person's blood, or a person's lineage, or a person's property. This is what Islam is here to preserve. And for this reason, any ruling in Islam, it is geared towards the preservation of these 5 things. So, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us of shirk and prohibited shirk in preservation of our tawheed and our belief and our deen. He prohibited alcohol and intoxicants for the preservation of a person's mind and intellect. He prohibited murder, and he judged and ruled that execution and capital punishment is to be established on the earth in preservation of people's lives. He prescribed cutting the hand of a thief in preservation of a person's property and wealth. He prescribed whipping the adulterer, or more correctly, the person who fornicates, the fornicator, and the one who accuses another of fornication without evidence, that these people be flogged, or an adulterer be stoned. Why? In preservation of what? People and society's lineage and honor and reputation. So every single ruling of Islam is in the spirit of preserving these priorities. And those are our priorities as Muslims. Every choice that we make, we are to go through this checklist. Does this put my deen at hazard? Does this put my blood or my health at hazard? Does this put my... And you can deduce the ruling of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala based on that. And most of the time you'll be correct. The only time that this gets complicated is prioritizing the priorities. That's what a faqih is. A true scholar is not someone who can tell you the difference between haram and halal. Everybody knows that. It's the one who can tell you the difference between that which is haram and that which is more haram. The one who can tell you the difference between that which is obligatory and that which is more obligatory. What takes precedence and what is prioritized over what? When we have a situation where a person's blood or a person's wealth is at hazard, which one takes priority? That is what the scholars of Islam are for. But any general ruling in Islam, it is in the spirit of preserving these 5 ضروريات. نسأل الله سبحانه وتعالى بمنه وكرمه وجوده أن يعلمنا ما ينفعنا وينفعنا بما علمنا. سبحانك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين وجزاكم الله خيرا.